This is the Shaw Hudson House in Plainfield, Massachusetts. It is the best and rarest kind of house museum, a time capsule with layers of family history, archives, and collections, all intact. And what a fascinating family. Located at the center of the historic district, what makes Plainfield and this house special is that so much of what was there when this map was made about 1870 is still there. You can walk the streets and get the sense of a place and time as vividly as anywhere in New England. How many towns still have a post office in a room in a house the way most country towns did years ago? The Ladies' Benevolent Society of the Congregational Church cares for the house. The weathercock from the town's first meeting house of 1792 is displayed inside. The church that replaced it in 1846 is just down the road. Across the street is the house where Dr. Samuel Shaw and his first wife, Sarah Bryant, first lived and practiced medicine from 1820 to 1833. A short walk beyond is Hilltop Cemetery, where most of the personalities we'll meet are buried, including Dr. Shaw and Sarah Bryant, who died at age 22 after the birth of their first child. Also shown here is the stone marking the grave of her father, Dr. Peter Bryant, from neighboring Cummington. Dr. Shaw apprenticed to Dr. Bryant and became a partner in his medical practice and then married his daughter. It was a small, tight-knit, intimate web of families back then. Most of the early families in Plainfield and Cummington migrated west together from the South Shore of Boston. Also buried at Hilltop is the town's first minister, Reverend Moses Halleck. A graduate of Yale in 1788, he was the town's first and longest-serving minister. He founded a school that became a major feeder for the then-young Williams College. One of Reverend Halleck's students became one of the most famous men in Gilded Age America. William Cullen Bryant was Sarah Shaw's brother and Dr. Bryant's son. He was the editor of the New York Evening Post and one of the prime Eastern backers of Abraham Lincoln. Bryant was also a major force behind the development of Central Park and the founding of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The picture on the right, known as Kindred Spirits, shows Bryant and his friend Thomas Cole at Catterskill Falls in the Catskills. It's one of the most famous paintings in America. Everyone in this small town remembered Bryant as one of their own. This is the Shaw Hudson House. It was built in 1833 in the late Federal style and has two formal front doors. The one on the right leads directly into the doctor's office. The picture above shows the house from the rear more than a century ago. Below, as it looks today, remarkably intact and untouched, a perfect preservation time capsule, both architecturally and in the contents inside. Here is the chamber bedroom. Everything in it was bought and placed there by the Shaw family. It is a time capsule, not another restoration, like an archaeological site with spectacular supporting documentation. Here is the original kitchen with a musket made in Pittsfield about 1820. Every object tells a story. Meet Dr. Samuel Shaw. His family moved to Plainfield a few years after his birth in 1790. He died in 1870 at the age of 80 and is buried nearby. He was a man of great influence and education. Meet his granddaughter, Clara Hudson, and her mother, Laura Shaw. Laura and her siblings grew up in the house. Clara used it as a summer home before donating it after her passing in 1963. A town map from the 1870s shows the house belonging to the Mrs. Shaw, Laura's unmarried sisters Stella and Sarah, who lived out their days here. On the left is a picture of Stella, Sarah, and Laura from about 1870. They were the daughters of Dr. Shaw's second wife, Elizabeth Clark. On the right is Julia Weston, after her marriage to Captain Byron Weston, the founder of the Weston Paper Company near Pittsfield. She was Dr. Shaw's granddaughter by his first wife, Sarah Bryant, and a favorite of her famous uncle, William Cullen Bryant. She was fashionable, rich, and a frequent guest in this house. Julia's granddaughter and namesake was the enormously famous cook and author Julia Child. This house has more layers than an onion, and every layer is fascinating. Dr. Shaw's daughter Laura attended the Rutgers Female Institute in New York, where she met and married Erasmus Darwin Hudson, Jr., a doctor who was educated at Columbia University. The Hudsons lived an affluent life in Astoria, New York, just across the East River from Manhattan, but summered in Plainfield. Dr. Hudson is shown here with Mary the cook and Annie the waitress. The Hudsons summered in Plainfield, and some of their possessions found their way home. Here we see Laura and the children at the house about 1880. Their city-raised children enjoyed Tom Sawyer-like summers in the country, bonding with their agrarian Hilltown heritage. The Hudsons had two children, Darwin Shaw Hudson and Clara Hudson, shown here together with their parents. Darwin, who became a civil engineer in New York, also summered here, and his sister Clara, who never married, was the benefactor and final steward of the house, which she bequeathed to the church. The sister's older brother, Dr. Samuel Francis Shaw, was also a physician. He assisted his father's practice in this house after graduating from Williams College in 1855. With the outbreak of the Civil War, he entered the Navy as an assistant surgeon and spent 19 years on duty that included voyages to the West Indies, the Azores, Peru, China, Japan, and Siberia. In 1877, he married a society girl from Philadelphia and practiced medicine there. He too summered in Plainfield, and some of his possessions are at the Shaw Hudson House. Family networks can be reconstructed from an extensive photo collection. Here on the left is Dr. Shaw's sister, known as Aunt Elvira, and on the right, Miss Sarah Shaw, who lived to age 91 and is shown here in 1927. The doctor's granddaughter, Clara Hudson, was next. She owned the house with her brother into the 1960s. She attended Barnard College in New York, where she was raised. Her brother Darwin Shaw Hudson graduated from Columbia in 1898 and remained in Astoria, New York, where he was a civil engineer. In 1906 he married Christine Barclay, shown here with the dog. Christine distinguished herself as an officer in the Red Cross during World War I, an ambulance driver with nursing skills. They summered in Plainfield, and some of their possessions and memorabilia are incorporated into the house. House museums are also about great stuff. Here, every object tells a story. The desk and bookcase and the writing table on the left were probably made in Northampton about 1795. This isn't Old Deerfield, and the collections aren't uniformly high-end antiques, but boy is the stuff in untouched condition. These predate the house and were brought here by Dr. Shaw's second wife, Elizabeth Clark, from a prominent Northampton family. These are painted fancy chairs made about the time the house was built. One rarely sees early furniture like this in better condition. Here is Dr. Shaw's leather-skin trunk and traveling box from about 1825. The box is lined inside with Northampton newspapers. A bandbox, plain but typical slat-back chairs, and this fabulous grain-painted chest, all from about 1820. Little details tell a story. This musket was made about 1822 and is signed by gunsmith Lemuel Pomeroy from nearby Pittsfield. This furniture in the French Empire style was probably made in or near Plainfield and acquired in the 1830s as new furnishings for the Shaw's new house. This remarkable needlework picture with a spread eagle and gold threads clutching an oval picture of George Washington's Mount Vernon was made about 1800 at the famous Patton School in Hartford, Connecticut. One of the most prestigious female academies in western New England, it bears the initials of Elizabeth Shaw's older sister, Anne Laura Clark, who has recently attracted substantial scholarly attention as an artist and one of the first female lecturers in the United States. During the 1820s and early 30s, she traveled about the East Coast speaking on subjects of historical and geographical interest. These are a couple watercolors from her travels in the South. Teacher, speaker, and woman of letters, Anne Clark never married, hence some of her things landed at Shaw Hudson, the home of her sister. On the left and right are historical charts used in her lectures. Also shown here are early lantern slides and an admission ticket from the collection of historic Northampton. Years before the Grimke sisters and Lucy Stone pioneered women as itinerant lecturers, Anne was doing exactly that. It's a big, underreported story. Silhouettes and cut-leaf pattern pictures, important and rare examples of popular art made by members of the family. Then there are oddball discoveries like this. With its bland velvet covering, this sofa doesn't look like much. But underneath, it's an 18th century hide-a-bed, possibly made in Northampton, and absolutely one of the rarest and most unusual examples of early American furniture you'll see anywhere. Might be interesting to restore the period upholstery on this one. Then there are the books. Here's John Harris's lavishly illustrated 2-volume 1764 edition of Voyages and Travels. Harris was an English writer, scientist, and priest. This is a rare treasure that speaks to the family's world outlook and educational values. There's also a copy of Captain James Cook's famous 1784 Voyage Around the World, also lavishly illustrated, some of the first and most richly illustrated books of the 18th century. Other books include a 1730 History of England and American Cookery, a rare 1822 reprint of the first American cookbook, originally published in Hartford in 1796 by Amelia Simmons. Here again is Dr. Samuel Shaw, the crown jewel and the main but by no means only reason why the Shaw Hudson House is a national treasure is this. Dr. Shaw was born in 1790. He trained under Dr. Peter Bryant and for almost 40 years operated a medical practice out of this house. He married Bryant's daughter and inherited his practice and many of his books when Bryant died just as Shaw was launching his practice. The Shaw Hudson House is a full bay and a half wider than your typical country mansion of this period, with the door on the right opening directly into the medical office. Here it is, the doctor's office, furnishings, tables, books, stove, and apothecary cabinet, small, compact, and astonishingly early and intact. By the time Shaw's son Francis left to serve as a naval surgeon, Dr. Shaw was retired. For 150 years since, this office, filled with the effects of the practice Shaw began in Plainfield about 1820, plus many items that belonged to Dr. Bryant as early as 1790. Since then, the room has been frozen in amber. If you stumbled across Santa's Workshop or the intact Cavern Club in Liverpool where the Beatles perfected their sound, it couldn't be more exciting. None of the items in this room are perfectly unique. Yale and Harvard medical schools have many more early books, but nowhere in the United States is so much so early, intact, and in an original setting like this. If you want to see what a country doctor's workspace was like at the beginning of scientific medicine in America, you have to visit Plainfield and you have to see this house, because it is simply the best thing of its type in the country. What we are witnessing here is the first glimmerings of modern science, clinical analysis, book knowledge, the origins of modern pharmacology, and the emergence of medicine as a real profession, buttressed by the new schools of medical learning and the equally new medical societies in Massachusetts, Connecticut, and beyond. Shaw was involved in all of it, among the first generation of licensed doctors, and because his children were the only family raised here and they preserved things, it is still intact and there is nothing that rivals it. The key thing is the books. Books were to doctors what hand tools were to blacksmiths and cabinet makers. This is also the origin of information-based professions. Books contained knowledge, and knowledge produced competence and power. The office contains more than 150 pre-1850 medical books and journals, dozens from before 1810. Here we see rare first editions of the famous New England Journal of Medicine, including Volume 1. Here is a book by Dr. William Cullen, one of the most important professors at the Edinburgh Medical School during its heydays, the leading center of medical education in the English-speaking world. A rare 1792 edition printed in Hartford and bought hot off the presses. 2 years later, Bryant named his first son after the author, a son who went on to become one of the most famous men in America. Other books include William Buchan's Domestic Medicine, first published in Edinburgh in 1771, and John Hunter's Treatise on the Blood, Inflammation, and Gunshot Wounds from 1796. the first book to analyze the treatment of gunshot wounds. Both were owned and signed by Peter Bryant. This library reveals that Peter Bryant was intellectually engrossed in the Edinburgh axis, the cutting edge of science and medicine as it was emerging from the ether of superstition, alchemy, secrecy, and guesswork. It would be hard to overstate the degree to which our lives have been enriched by the movement this represents. More books include John Cox's Medical Museum and a book on the plague, dysentery, and yellow fever, evidence-based medicine updated with clinical studies. Principles of Surgery by John Bell and Erasmus Darwin's Zoonomia, or Laws of Organic Life from 1794, that incorporates early ideas on the theory of evolution more fully developed by Darwin's famous grandson Charles Darwin. Laura Shaw's husband, Erasmus Darwin Hudson, like William Cullen Bryant, was named for iconic figures in the early history of Western medicine. Early books on military, surgery, and venereal disease also lined the shelves. It's the best and largest early collection of medical books in its original environment in America. Among the treasures is this lavishly illustrated surgical treatise by John Bell, one of the founders of the discipline of surgical anatomy. His gift for anatomic illustration was magnificently realistic for its time. Here is a book by Benjamin Rush, best known as a founding father of the United States. Physician, writer, educator, and signer of the Declaration of Independence, Rush attended the Continental Congress and served as Surgeon General in the Continental Army. He was the rare American who studied at the famous University of Edinburgh in Scotland, where he earned a medical degree in 1768. The collection also includes voluminous manuscripts and records pertaining to Dr. Shaw's practice, including daybooks, receipts, and business records. Also correspondence, medical recipes, and purchase invoices. The apothecary cabinet contains hundreds of bottles, beakers, boxes, and jars of medicines and organic and inorganic compounds, including arsenic, copper, and opium. Dozens of stoppered bottles, most dating before 1850, tell the story of early medicine. Pounce and quinine were used to treat malaria. Mortar and pestle, beakers, funnels, early chemistry glassware, it's all here. Plus handmade and marked containers for pills and powders. Inside the drawers of the cabinet are a veritable museum of medical history, including pumps, syringes, ceramic dishes, and more. This label from Wood and Kingsley in Northampton, corrosive sublimate, was used as a treatment for syphilis. Kingsley and Wood established in Northampton about 1855. The Shaw Hudson House archives document the development of medical education. Dr. Shaw attended classes at Williams College and was elected to the Massachusetts Medical Society in 1819. He also studied at the medical school associated with Harvard as early as 1817. At age 32, Dr. Shaw became one of the founding instructors at Berkshire Medical Institution, founded in Pittsfield in 1822, and affiliated with Williams College. The school trained almost 2,000 doctors, more than Harvard or Yale, before it closed in 1867. Scientific medicine and clinical analysis were all about transcending the quackery and superstition that characterized the medical business for centuries prior. What they were up against was epidemics, yellow fever, spotted fever, smallpox, measles, and treatments more likely to kill you than the disease. In 1793, a yellow fever epidemic in Philadelphia killed 10% of the population, triggering a panic response about the significance of public health. Although no portrait of Dr. Shaw exists prior to the 1850s, these are images of his New England contemporaries and peers, portraits of doctors and doctoring from 1790 to 1830, just as the profession emerged. Shaw Hudson is not the only museum in the country able to present the early history of medicine. Colonial Williamsburg, the Farmers Museum at Cooperstown, Genesee Country Museum, and Dr. Hugh Mercer's Apothecary Shop in Fredericksburg, Virginia, shown here, interpret early medicine brilliantly. But they are all restorations. Shaw Hudson has the potential to be something more, and every bit as evocative. The good news is that there is more to learn, see, and do in Plainfield and the Highlands area than Shaw Hudson. Indeed, there is more to the house than just the Shaw Hudson family. From the outset, the Plainfield Historical Society preserved and presented local collections in a couple rooms in the house reserved for that purpose. Like most community-based historical societies, they have some great and unique stuff. On the left, a Gothic-style iron clock that belonged to a local family, and on the right, a surveyor's transit and compass used to lay out the town's roads before 1790, a rare and unique artifact from the early history of civil engineering. The Historical Society has photographs and ephemera like this broadside from the cattle show of the Mountain Farmers Club in 1861. This friendship quilt, like the house, like the cemetery, like the entire town, documents a world we can still evoke, see, and feel. History in the ambience of an unspoiled rural New England hill town is the essence of Plainfield's charm. In addition to a National Register Historic District and a nationally significant historic house, the Historical Society recently bought and preserved the Plainfield Mill, Brook Mill sites. This is the best first-period water-powered mill site we've ever seen in New England, and is that ever a story? Look at these cellar holes and ruins. Like the Shaw Hudson, the documentation is extraordinary, as is the potential for this to become another nationally significant learning destination. So where is Plainfield? It's in the Highlands region of western Massachusetts, the hill towns between the Connecticut River Valley and the Berkshires. There's a lot here, and if any part of New England still epitomizes New England before so much was blanketed in asphalt and strip malls, this is it. The Highland Community Initiative of the Trustees of Reservations underscores the importance of the natural and cultural resources of this region. There are no large towns in the region, but there are many great places, places that matter. Close to Shelburne Falls, Williamstown, Pittsfield, and Deerfield, Shaw Hudson is just 6 miles from the National Historic Landmark William Cullen Bryant Homestead, operated by the Trustees of Reservations. Many of the region's towns have community-based historical societies that preserve and present wonderful stuff and stories. Here is the Historical Society in nearby Buckland, Massachusetts. Plainfield is also known for agriculture and farming. The local foods movement and neighboring Conway's Festival of the Hills all celebrate locally grown. Plainfield is a small town. Its population peaked at around 1,000 during the era of Dr. Shaw and is about 600 today. And yet scholars of American history have found much to mine. Jane Nylander, one of our greatest historians of domestic life, and Barnes Risnick's study of medicine in early New England, tapped local resources extensively to develop their portraits of early America. Books are also in the works about members of the Shaw family circle, including Anne Laura Clark, Dr. Bryant's sister Charity, and her life partner Sylvia Drake, and their mutual friend from Plainfield, Lydia Richards Snell. Lydia, who is buried in nearby Hilltop Cemetery, shared an account of Dr. Bryant's death in 1820 with his sister Charity, then living in Weybridge, Vermont. She described how, quote, he died in his chair by the bursting of a blood vessel, and how his coffin was placed in the front of the house beneath the towering poplars. That chair is the very one in Dr. Shaw's office today. It's a quality of realism and authenticity that gives goosebumps. Okay, so here's what we have. An impeccably documented house in an impeccably documented town where more of the material culture and built environment from the early national period survives intact than ever occurs. The point is this: to know what Hilltown life was like during the formative years of our nation, this is the place to experience it. It's not one of hundreds of places. It is one of the very best from among 1,000 or more, and that's on top of the unique place Shaw Hudson has in reporting the story of the origins of medicine and scientific method in America. The Shaw Hudson House is a time capsule within a time capsule, and it is without doubt a treasure of national significance. What does it need to be sure it's here for the next generation and the generation after that? A larger endowment and a desire and willingness to develop its potential as a museum experience. Qualifying it as a National Historic Landmark will be challenging but warranted. and it will attract support. The qualities that make places like Plainfield special are so easily lost. We can't save everything, but I'm sure we can and must save this. To learn more and get involved, join Friends of Shaw Hudson on Facebook or contact Judith Williams by email. Thank you.